Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Time for the May Q&A. So we've asked lots of questions, or we've asked a question, and you guys have given us lots of questions to answer.
You're getting confused. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah,
I think that's right.
We'll go with that. Anyway, May Q&A. I'm with Tim, no monitor Steve, so in person Steve. Very excited about that. And before I confuse myself anymore, it's a Sunday, so guys, give me a break, honestly. We just had some lunch and I'm busy digesting that and my brain's not working yet. So with that said, before we get to the first question, let's cut to this month's, or the video sponsor thing.
Yeah.
Do that. Go. Today's video sponsor is Thermal Grizzly and their Cryonaut Extreme, which is now available in a 2-gram syringe. This high-performance thermal paste delivers maximum thermal conductivity thanks to an extremely small particle size and layer thickness. It's also very flexible, capable of standing up to sub-zero temperatures for extreme overclocking, but also performs exceptionally well for air and water cooling applications. So if your CPU or GPU needs repasting, then I suggest checking out the Thermal Grizzly range. Link is in the video description. Okay, looks like we've got a sort of motherboard type question here, Tim.
Yep.
How/do temperatures affect performance? Or is temperature largely irrelevant until actual throttling happens at higher temperatures? Always assumed that even a few degrees would change the boosting behavior of a given CPU/GPU, but had trouble finding info to confirm that belief. Probably hard finding info that sort of answers that question one way or the other, because it would depend heavily on the GPU, like the GPU architecture, the series, the CPU, same sort of deal. And then you'll have some insight into this as well, because this is probably something that really comes into play with laptops where, you can't just chuck a gigantic cooler on it. So a lot of these parts that are designed with, well, desktop type operation, especially with Intel with like no power limits, you can see that on desktop. Don't really get 200 watt laptop CPUs too often, I wouldn't have thought.
No, not really.
So how do temperatures affect performance? Again, it's very difficult to answer this because it depends on, like, when you're saying, where was it? If it went up even a few degrees, that would affect the performance. Usually no. There'll be like a threshold of when, like, think of it, I guess, what would be an easy way to explain this? Like a fan curve. So the fan runs it up to a certain range of RPM, and if the targeted whatever it is gets to 60 degrees, the fan ramps up in speed.
Yep.
And then it may go from 60 all the way to 80 before a further RPM speed is, before there's an adjustment to the fan speed. So with the CPU, it may be that it will run at full speed or without any kind of governing limits at, say, 60 degrees or less. But then you can go to, 61, and that may invoke these limitations. But then it may be that you get up to 70 or 80 before some other kind of limitations put in place. And again, that's going to vary depending on the CPU and GPU and that kind of stuff. So in the case of GPUs, usually you'll get to like the max boost up to fairly high temperatures. Like hotspot temperatures can be over, I think AMD will go up to like 110 degrees before you'll see throttling. So really they work as intended until throttling. So whatever the temperature is to create that throttling period, then you're pretty much seeing maximum performance. But there can be a bit of a balancing act between power and thermals and that sort of stuff, depending on what it is.
I think over time people have shown like small clock speed differences on like an Nvidia GPU with GPU boost depending on the temperature. But we're usually talking pretty small differences. And whether you're running at 70 or 80 degrees, you might be looking at like 100 megahertz or something like that, which isn't really significant enough to make a huge deal about.
Because it's so dynamic as well, it is really difficult to tell what is causing that difference in frequency.
Yeah, it changes so often.
It's so sensitive to load. So, obviously, I don't think it's performance that you really want to worry about, because, as Tim says, it's minor differences. You're talking about a percent or two difference in terms of performance, which you're not going to notice. So it's more about operating volume, really. If you can keep the temperature down, the fans don't have to spin as fast, quieter result. So that's really all you want to be worried about there.
And of course, not exceeding the actual thermal limits, like running your CPU at 95 degrees or whatever tends to invoke significant downclocking. But
you obviously want to avoid throttling. All right, next question here. Any thoughts on the new LHR cards for Nvidia and announcements saying that only AIB cards will have the limiters. So that's the light hash rate limiter, right?
Yeah, so if you're not super familiar with what Nvidia's been doing in the market at the moment, they've been implementing these LHR cards, first with the RTX 3060 when it was announced, basically to detect the Ethereum mining algorithm and very similar algorithms, and limiting the performance of the GPUs to 50% of what they could do in terms of hashing. So Nvidia's just recently re-announced LHR cards, so I think they're going to be implementing it for the 3060 Ti, the 3070, and the 3080, but not the 3090. So new versions of those cards will also come with this feature enabled. So in terms of thoughts on it, I mean, we polled our audience recently, and it seemed like about 60% of you guys wanted Nvidia to go down this path of limiting mining performance, with I guess the idea being that if you can't hash as quickly on these GPUs, then they're not going to be worth as much on, say, the scalper market, because generally speaking, the prices that you see on the scalper market are closely related to their mining profitability. So if the mining performance is limited, then that's going to potentially improve that. So from that perspective, I guess you could sort of understand what Nvidia is trying to do and how that might help the situation. As to whether I think it's the right thing to be done, personally, I think there's definitely pros and cons to each way that a lot of people tend to bring up. You know, obviously reducing the mining performance is one thing, but then if the limiter gets basically, I don't know, got around by people,
unlimited.
Unlimited, removed, you know, the restriction gets removed by people, say in a mining farm, then potentially actual miners, like professional miners, are not getting the limited performance, but then a casual everyday buyer that just wants to, you know, make up the additional cost of their GPU, get a bit of return from their investment, those people end up suffering. So I think from that perspective, it's really hard to make just a definitive call and say this is a good idea or this is a bad idea. I'm certainly in favor of Nvidia at least trying to do something, although I guess from another perspective, I'm not keen on like the marketing angles. If it's only a marketing thing as opposed to a legitimate reason, then that becomes a downside. So again, it's a very, very tricky and complicated proposition. As for this second part of this question, which says the announcement saying that only the AIB cards will have the limiters, that's been another factor that's come up, which is that the Founders Edition cards that Nvidia sells through their website supposedly do not have the LHR limiter. So, and obviously the RTX 3090 across all AIBs and the Founders Edition won't have it either. And I don't really understand the reasoning behind that. Nvidia says it's because they're selling their cards at MSRP. I don't really see why that would have any impact on it, because often you sell a card at MSRP to a miner and then they just go try either resell it on the used market or the scalper market or whatever. So I think it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I'm not quite sure why they would do it. If they really wanted to make it more for the gamers, then surely selling it at the MSRP with the LHR feature enabled would kind of be the gold standard for gamers, because you know that miners aren't going to try and flood in and purchase those cards, because if they're only on sale for like a couple of seconds, then you want to make sure that gamers are primarily interested in it as opposed to miners. So yeah, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but again, there's a lot of complicated things going on with this, and it's still up in the air how effective the actual limitation will be. We know Nvidia kind of dropped the ball a bit with the RTX 3060, releasing a driver that just completely removed the limits. So hopefully this round is a bit more effective in that regard.
Yeah, if they add the limiter and then it makes it much easier to buy a graphics card, then I think you have your answer.
Yeah, so proof will be in the results.
Yep. What are your thoughts on ITX Systems? Is the price premium worth it? This is a classic, it depends. We're going to make that t-shirt made up. But look, it really does depend on what you're looking for, what you want. I've been building ITX type systems since they were a thing. It was always a fun, exciting thing to do back when, well before I was doing YouTube, we were making them. And yeah, I sort of have, I don't know if a love-hate relationship with ITX Systems. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but I guess what it boils down to is I'm not really the right person for an ITX system, at least for my main system. So I've made ITX systems that I use as home theater PCs, really cool in that setting. It fits in either, your entertainment cabinet TV type thing or whatever it is you may have, or behind the TV. You put it there, you connect everything up and you forget about it. It just works. So that's nice. But as a main system, I've dabbled with the idea a few times, but I always enjoy the build initially, sort of love the system. You know, it's always so impressive what you can put. Like we did those, what were they? The Computex systems. You've still got yours.
I've got mine somewhere around here.
I saw
Just
it
down there,
actually.
actually.
Saw it floating around before. That was a lot of fun to build that live stream. I really enjoyed that. And they worked a treat, like so much better than taking a laptop. So Tim and I made a little slim ITX editing rig. We took a monitor and
it's over here.
it worked brilliant. But then when I got home, I tried sort of repurposing mine for things, but just found it too limited in what I wanted to do. And also upgrading the CPU, then thermals became a bit of a problem. So I've always found them, I guess, to sort of try and get to where I'm going with this, just impractical for my use case. Like very cool initially, but then when it comes time to upgrade something or whatever, I can't be bothered. I end up pulling it apart, leaving it in a mess, and just put it in a normal system because, well, I've got plenty of room. So, and obviously I'm using a Threadripper system, which we did another live stream for and built that. So if you've got a need and a purpose, they're worth the premium, because if you only have enough room to fit something like that on your desk or wherever it may be, then that's all you can do.
It's kind of like I find it very similar to sort of the gaming laptop argument.
Yes,
it's like
that's a perfect.
It's kind of it's never going to be as good as a full desktop because you're taking away potentially performance if you can't get enough cooling in there. It's much more complicated to do the build. It's harder to upgrade, all that sort of thing. So from all those perspectives, if any of those things matter to you, want the best performance, the easiest upgradability, then you wouldn't choose to make an ITX system.
Yeah.
But for people that need the portability or need the space, then it does make a lot of sense and makes sense
it's even
pay
like
the premium.
When people say, for my home computer setup thing, I'm tossing up between getting a laptop or a desktop.
Yeah.
And it's always like, well, do you need to take it anywhere? No.
Yeah.
Obviously get a desktop then, because it's just way better. But if you have to take it somewhere and you have that need for the mobile aspect of the device, then you get a laptop. And similar argument with these. If you need it to be like small and compact or whatever, then you get that. If you don't need that, then this is not a practical solution. You don't use that, because when it comes, time to upgrade, or they're more difficult to cool, they're difficult to upgrade, and I always ultimately end up, I think 6 months down the track, when I wanted to change something or do something with it, I always end up being disappointed. Yeah, because it's just more fiddling around and difficult, and I don't know, it sort of loses its magic. I'm not sure what it is, but I think it boils down to the fact that I don't need a small computer. All right, really interesting question here, which I'm sure we'll have a bit of discussion about.
I'm sure.
So, read something like this. I like the name IKEA God, by the way. Seeing DLSS being more and more used in games, was my decision going for a 5700 XT instead of a 2070 Super a bad idea? I think to answer the question, basically, if you've got the 5700 XT and you haven't had any driver or problems, which some people had, and it's performed as advertised, and I think already you haven't made a bad decision, because the 5700 XT was $100 less. For that generation where it was RDNA versus Turing, the 5700 XT represented exceptionally good value, fantastic performance at $400. And as far as I can tell, it's only gotten better relative to the 2070 Super over time. Like if you take like a 30 game sample, for example, there's a lot of games now where they're like, it's faster or as fast, which is quite remarkable. Yep. So it only appears to me that it's improved in terms of performance over time for rasterization performance, obviously. But DLSS is growing in support. There are more games that do support it now, and it does can make quite a substantial difference to performance with comparable image quality, let's say, because no need to get into that. So it's again difficult to call now, because you could sort of evaluate this and ask this question again in a year when, hopefully AMD has their alternative, and depending on how that plays out, it could change it entirely. But I think, I would just summarize this by saying the 5700 XT, if you bought it when it came out, you've had it for quite a while now. You saved $100 US, which is not insignificant. And really, the 5700 XT plays at a pretty impressive level in all of the games today.
I think that with this question, it really comes down to when you bought into this generation. Because if you bought right at the start when the 5700 XT and 2070 Super came out, then for a lot of that first year or even 18 months of those cards being available, DLSS wasn't as impressive of a feature because the game support wasn't there. So if you bought right at the start, then you would have had 18 months of effectively just buying the better card for rasterization and it being cheaper.
Well, the better value
card for in terms of this comparison.
And I think we should just say that if inverse this, if you bought a 2070 Super, I don't think you should be disappointed either.
No, that's right.
Because for $500, that, you know, although it came later in the game, I don't think much later, but anyway, it doesn't matter.
I think they were around the same time because the 2070 was already on the market, but the 5700 XT launched around the same time as the Supers.
So I should have just kept with my original train of thought, which is if you bought either of these, you know, they're good value cards and they have their strengths and weaknesses, but there's no right or wrong option between the two. Is how I would put that.
And I think it depends as well how often you're an upgrader. Like if you upgrade every 2 years and you bought right at the start of the generation, then you basically missed DLSS being relevant for that card. And now you'd be buying, you know, a 30 series GPU or a 6000 series GPU from AMD. And of course you'd have to then reevaluate DLSS being important to you. So yeah, I guess there's a lot of angles to this. I would say if you bought a 5700 XT right at the end of that generation, it's probably a bit different because, you know, while the card is still the superior value, you're probably going to be keeping it for the next, you know, 2-3 years, and then DLSS becomes a much more significant thing. And I guess you could feel that you'd missed out a bit there. But then, again, we've been talking a lot about the price difference, which, again, that comes into a factor. And certainly if those two products were the same price, then this argument would be very, very different. That $100 difference it completely changes this discussion a lot. It wouldn't have been appropriate for them to be the same price. So, it's a very difficult one.
At the end of the day, you bought a graphics card. So, you know, if you had have waited for this generation, you may have regretted that. So, hopefully you bought it pretty early on and you've been enjoying it, playing a lot of games. And in my opinion, there's a lot of value just in that.
Yeah, exactly. It's always with these discussions like, oh, should I upgrade this or should I wait for an upgrade? It's always about like, you can't just factor in what performance you're going to get in the future. It's also about what did you get at the time before you choose to upgrade. Like having a faster GPU for an additional year could be worth more to you than having a slower GPU and then waiting a year upgrading to something better. Yeah. So all that stuff needs to be factored in. I guess it just depends from person to person.
Yeah, at this point in time, DLSS is a significant factor now. It's making it difficult to recommend AMD GPUs, especially at a similar price point.
That's right. So it needs to be another situation like this where, you know, obviously MSRP pricing isn't really a thing, but, you know, 6700 XT versus 3070, we've talked about that a lot with that market.
Yeah, if these two products were available today at a similar type deal, there's a $100 difference, DLSS would be a heavy thing pushing you to pay the premium. But at the same time, $100 on a $400 versus $500 product is quite a large saving, and you can put that money towards a future upgrade. So you'd have to evaluate all of that and work it out for yourself what you want to do with your money.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be looking at it being, 20% more expensive? Are you getting, on average in the games that you play, like 20% more performance? I guess it would come down to how many DLSS titles that you play. I mean, DLSS support is definitely getting better, but there's still a lot of people out there that may not encounter as many DLSS games in the selection of things that they're playing. So, all right, next question is, with Nvidia putting hardware control in their LHR cards to limit mining, does that mean in the future where individual programs, basically anything but gaming, could be handicapped to force you to buy quadros and such for Blender? So this is something that's come up a lot, people getting a bit, I guess, what's the word, anxious maybe, that Nvidia is potentially going to limit more than just mining for future GPUs. But the thing is that they've already been doing this.
I was going to say, it's like they've thought of this before.
Yeah, so features like, for example, in previous architectures that could do, say, let's say half rate FP64, then often you would get that feature enabled for a Quadro or Tesla sort of GPU. And then for the gaming card, that would be cut down to, say, 1/16 or 1/32 of the performance. And that is just a very similar control. there's no reason why the gaming card couldn't support that. I think it has been a bit different in more recent architectures where things like Volta did support that, but then Turing didn't support that, didn't support the half rate processing. So it depends on the architecture, but this has been a thing that Nvidia has done before. They've also limited things like 10-bit monitor output. Like native 10-bit support was up until recently also a feature that was not available on GeForce GPUs, but was available on the professional cards that they offered. So to say that like the LHR cards, that's the first thing that's ever limited you from doing things, that is definitely not the case. So I would hope that they don't go further down that path and start, say, limiting CUDA performance for applications like Blender. I don't think they would. But I don't think they would go beyond what they've already been doing and already shown. And it depends a lot on the competition as well.
As I say, they still have competition.
Yeah, if Nvidia starts limiting the performance in Blender, for example, and then AMD's GPUs offered you full Blender performance, then that starts to become, you know, a talking point, similar to like a DLSS or their encoding support. So I don't think they'd be going down that path anytime soon. And certainly the LHR cards are sort of a possibly even just a short-term stopgap sort of solution until the crypto mining boom sort of dies down a bit. So we'll see.
Hi guys, with Computex around the corner, which we won't be attending for sure. There's no way
It's like next week, isn't it?
Well, yeah, also just we couldn't attend anyway because there's like travel restrictions coming back into Australia and stuff, right?
I don't think it's even a live show.
Okay.
I think it's just online only.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought it was going to be a live show this year, which I was like, how the hell's that going to work?
Well.
Anyway, clearly I don't know much about it because there's no way we were going. There's other considerations with Taiwan as well, but we won't get into any of that. What food or drink do you guys miss from your time in Taiwan back when the show was in person?
I remember doing Megamix all that time. I've got to say that a lot of those drinks and stuff is not really my sort of cup of tea, you know?
Yeah, it's a bit rough. I mean, for me, it'd be, hanging out with guys like Kev. Obviously, we can't do that ever again. So that was something that I really looked forward to at Computex. So yeah, down there, and like guys like Jared from Jared's Tech, we caught up a lot with him as well. So that was fun.
I think that's more the benefit of Computex, is meeting all the people in the industry. And you don't often get a time where a lot of people from around the world all doing the same thing are sort of in the same place at the same time. So you do get that opportunity to go and go to a pub after a day on the show floor and have an hour catching up or whatever. That's the amount of time you can
for sure
spend. I mean, the food and drink in Taiwan isn't bad or anything, but it's certainly we don't go out and start experimenting too much when we need to.
Yeah, we're not doing street food and stuff because it's a crazy week. You need all your energy. You can't afford to get sick or anything like that.
And you need to like slam, like you got lunch, you got like a 5-minute break to just find whatever's closest to you, slam it down.
Well, because
the next thing.
We're editing all our videos and filming them and doing the whole lot. So, but yeah, the highlight definitely is catching up with the other people in the industry for sure. Given the rising trend of motherboard prices, what price do you think a good board with good VRMs and features should currently cost at MSRP level? Surely $170 US should give you features and overclocking. What's the most you would pay for a motherboard personally? Okay, so two different questions there. Obviously, motherboard prices are rising because, well, everything is rising in price, like raw materials and all that. So that's going to increase the price of the end result, the end product. What is a good price for a motherboard at the moment? If you're going for like B550, B560 type boards, B560 like $150 seems to be the point where you get a good quality board, like the Asus Tough Gaming. That's a good B560 board. And then for B550, 130 to 140, so you save a little bit there with AMD. And of course, I've done all my B550 VRM thermal testing, so you can check that out. But there are a few affordable boards there, so I don't think it's certainly nothing like the GPUs. Like you can get a decent motherboard. So yeah, in terms of VRMs, like in the example of the B550, $130, $140 US, and then it's just what features do you need. So how much you have to spend beyond that depends on what type of LAN you want. Do you want wireless? How many USB? So on and so forth. You guys get it. You've bought a motherboard before. How much would I spend? I think it was just for gaming. I'd be fairly conservative with the motherboard because for gaming, it's like you have a couple of USB ports, gigabit LAN,
Your PCIe slot.
a PCIe slot.
Yeah, then you're set.
So pretty standard, pretty simple stuff for gaming. And then, even then for gaming, VRM, at least short term, is not super important because you're not loading up all cores at 100% frequency and holding them there for hours on end. So 150 US, I'd probably go for somewhere between there with the cap $200 US. It depends on, I guess, the financial situation, how much I want to invest in gaming and all that sort of stuff. But knowing me, to be somewhere in there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
What about you?
Yeah, I'd be pretty similar for a gaming build. I mean, obviously for production related stuff, then that becomes
A bit different. If you're making money
a
off
bit
it,
different. Then it's like, I might need, say, 3 M.2 ports, which would require a high-end board. Or, there's been times where I need a specific format of board and doesn't have enough SATA ports. So then you need to find the specific model, which tends to cost more. So, yeah, I've never been a big fan of those like super high-end boards, like the Zenith boards and the Crosshairs and the...
You wouldn't buy an RTX 3090, for example, though. So it's a different market that's targeting.
Yeah, there's extreme overclocking boards where, unless it had some specific feature I needed, like, say I needed 20 USB ports, something crazy, then, the value just isn't there for those products.
You buy an
It's not
expansion
something I'd
card.
buy. Yeah, well, that'd make a lot more sense, wouldn't it?
It'd be a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with like gigabit LAN or 10 gigabit LAN and stuff like that. Is it a good time for Nvidia 1000? So I think like the GeForce 10 series, probably like Pascal, and and last Polaris GPUs to replace the thermal paste and pads. So what are they now? Like, are they
5 years old for Pascal at the moment, right?
Yeah, it must be 4 to 5.
I would have thought so. Yeah, 4 to 5
Time
years.
flies, doesn't it? How long? I guess the Hardware Unboxed YouTube channel's about that old, and
those are sort of the first GPUs that were covered on Hardware Unboxed was in that era. So
yeah,
I think that makes
they're getting on now. But anyway, to answer the question about the replacing the thermal paste and pads, replacing thermal pads, I honestly don't think I've ever replaced a thermal pad in my life. And I have some GPUs that have been in regular use now for well over a decade.
Yep.
Same thing with thermal paste, to be honest. I don't know if that's an embarrassing thing to admit to or not. But yeah, I mean, I've got like GeForce GTX 2080 graphics cards and Radeon R9 290 or even older stuff like Radeon HD 5970. And I got cards that are super old and they've been used regularly for benchmarks. I mean, they were used probably heavily for the first few years and then less and less as time goes by. But I think for most of them, unless I've taken them apart recently to get PCB shots or whatever, I haven't really repasted them, and haven't really noticed any crazy thermals or whatever. So I guess it depends on the quality of the thermal paste. Thermal paste is definitely something that you would repaste. As far as pads go, I'm not sure on that one.
I think pads probably have a bit of a longer lifespan than
I would have thought
a thermal paste goes. And again, as you say, it depends on the quality. I'd say, probably not earlier than 5 years. I mean, most thermal paste is designed to last quite some time, but obviously it does degrade. It doesn't last forever through repeated heat cycling as you heat it up, cool it down, heat up, cool it down.
I've seen
stuff.
I have seen stuff that's like turns brittle and hard and is not as thermally conductive as it once was.
I'd probably say somewhere in that 5 to 8 year range if you're using your GPU consistently, like that's in your main rig, that's your gaming card. For obvious market reasons, you may not be upgrading at the moment. Then probably somewhere around that would make sense to go into and do a thermal paste replacement.
If it's running hot or it's starting to thermal throttle, that's a great place to start.
That's a sign for sure.
And obviously, if you've got a card that you're using, use some kind of benchmark to measure what it currently, something that's repetitive as well. Measure what temperature it runs at, and then years down the track, whenever you can keep checking to see if it's close to that. But I don't think there's any sort of time frame that you should absolutely change your oil.
3080 Ti and Zen 3, meh. Would love to hear how Steve's garden and yard work goals and plans ended up turning out this year, with winter now just about to start for you guys. So how's your garden going on our Garden Unboxed? Just
lovely. Thank you. Thanks for asking. I imagine this has come from probably some of the tweets I made showing, because I think during summer I planted about 150 trees, which adds to the thousands I've already planted over the years. And they're all alive, all of them. Not one of them died over summer, so that was good. and they're enjoying the what would you say, the easier conditions.
Yep.
So, but yeah, occasionally from time to time I make a garden related BTS video for the Patreon and Floatplane members. I'll probably do one soon actually. Now that it's winter, it's a bit different. So I did a few over summer. But yeah, I suppose that is keeping me somewhat entertained while I wait for the computer market to recover and become interesting once again.
And you plant mostly natives at your place, right? So they're all climate appropriate, unlike your sort of die or have troubles with that.
Yeah, that's right. So really long story short, I bought a 5-acre property 11 years ago, and it was farmland. So it used to be a native Australian forest, and it was cleared for farming, dairy farming, and then I've bought it. And so my wife and I decided that we would basically restore most of it to sort of bushland type deal. So I grew like 5,000 Australian native plants from seed. Actually, I think it was like 10,000, but we ended up planting about 5,000 and gave the rest away, or they ended up getting pot bound because, planting 5,000 trees takes longer than I thought it would. But yeah, so it's gone from just a grass paddock now to a bit of a forest. So
it's quite nice.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
Those people on Patreon will know what I'm talking about anyway, or Floatplane. Alrighty, we'll hit pause there for part 1 of the May Q&A. A lot of really good questions there, so I enjoyed that one. I think probably the last few months now, despite the fact that there's not a whole lot going on in the industry, it's kind of a weird time and not terribly exciting due to things that you guys are well and truly familiar with at this point. But yeah, we've been getting a lot of good questions, a lot of different things that we don't normally get. So
which is good.
That's been cool. So thanks for that. Much appreciated. Hopefully next month is just as good. There'll be some new products between now and then, won't there?
I would say so.
Some other stuff to talk about for once. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you want to support the channel more directly, then we have stuff like Patreon, Floatplane. Links for those are in the video description. You'll get access to the monthly live stream where Tim and I usually get together like this and we just answer your questions live. It's a lot of fun. Usually, it's a lot of fun. We also have a Discord chat. That's really cool. A lot of different sections there, monitors and benchmarking, all that kind of stuff. Behind the scenes content, and then Q&As. We do Q&As apparently. So anyway, I'll stop my rambling now and just say thank you very much for watching. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.